for the most part, Jared, he did a really important literature review on open education resources and some big gaps that are there. And I'll just introduce by talking about what we in the open education group refer to as the COO framework, giving us 4 different angles on open educational resources. And if you were here for any of the previous 2 presentations, you'll see that we were kind of using this methodology. So the COO stands for cost, outcomes, use, and perception. And I'll just briefly talk about what we mean by each of those, and then Jared will discuss literature on each of these areas. So we're talking about cost. This is maybe the most self-explanatory. How much money is saved? So we tried to quantify earlier how much did Project Kaleidoscope save? How much did the Nebo School District save by using open science textbooks? Other presentations at this conference have looked at how much did the Virginia Community College system save? What's the Maricopa Millions? There's all sorts of different ways we're looking at the cost, how much money is saved by using open resources. Outcomes is a key factor. We have the idea that you get what you pay for. So some people are going to naturally be suspicious of open education because how can a $0 textbook be as high quality as a $175 textbook? So we're trying to find as many metrics as possible to establish that at a minimum, no harm is being done, and ideally student success is increasing when open textbooks are being used. What we mean by use here is that one of the real benefits of open textbooks is that they can be remixed, revised, and trying to quantify, is that happening? So when someone adopts an open textbook, are they making it their own and remixing it and making that textbook better? Or are they actually treating it as they would a proprietary textbook and just moving lockstep with that? And that's kind of what the issue of use is. And then when it comes to perceptions, this is maybe the easiest data to obtain, but I think some of the most important, which is how are people viewing this? Do they view the open textbook as an inferior product? If you have teachers who are using them and saying, I was much more satisfied with my proprietary textbook, then you've got a real difficulty in widespread open textbook adoption. Similarly, if students in classes utilizing open textbooks feel like they have an inferior product, it's much more difficult to obtain more widespread adoption. So that's the COO framework, and Jared will talk about specific studies within that framework.
So when I thought about the COO framework, I think about evaluating textbook replacement and how do we evaluate if it's good. And I think all of those 4 ways are ways that you could think about it. And a lot of the research that I've been doing has been on outcomes. How do students learn with the replacement for the textbook? And it's a really specific kind of thing to look at, and I was curious as to what's been done. The Oer Research Hub has recently released hypotheses about OER, things that they think are interesting in studying and should be studied in community. And 2 of those deal with, at least 2 of them deal with outcomes, these 2 specifically. One is that the use of OER leads to improvement in student performance and satisfaction. So one of those is perception, the satisfaction piece, and the other is an outcomes piece. And then the second is the use of OER as an effective method for improving retention for at-risk students. Because of the groups that we're working with the Utah State and Project Kaleidoscope, who are doing textbook replacement, I've been looking really specifically at textbooks. And I want to know, well, what's been done in terms of outcomes associated with textbook, and specifically OER textbooks? Transition. Because for whether we like it or not, and I think a lot of us probably don't like it, the textbook has become the de facto curriculum, and has been for quite a long time in schools. And it really, at least in my educational experience, high school, college, not as much master's, but somewhat in my PhD has dominated my educational experience and the curriculum experience that I've had. So the guiding research questions for this lit review were threefold. The first is I was interested in seeing, is there any evidence that's been compiled that OER, the adoption of OER textbooks has led to comparable or better or worse outcomes? I want to know if there have been any studies that have looked at that have been published. How does the literature pertain to the evaluation of OER compared to the literature of evaluating textbook quality and adoption in general? That was important to me to start to look at. And then the last thing is, what does this review about what are the future directions for OER research? And that had some real bearings on what I wanted to do. So to start off with the methodology here, that's so small, goodness gracious, sorry. I used an Eric and Google Scholar search. I'll save the methodology. I look for things related to textbooks, OER, things related to quality, things related to learner outcomes, and basically found 314 articles that I narrowed down to 29 relevant articles through reviewing their abstracts and the content of the articles. I noticed that there were a lot more had been done on perceptions than had been done on outcomes. That was one of the things that really came up, is perceptions is a lot easier to research, or at least a lot more common to look at. But some of the things that kept popping up is if evaluators really like the if they perceive, like teachers perceive or evaluators perceive it as quality, does this correlate with student learning? And there's not a consensus on that. Are students actually good judges of the quality of textbooks? There's research that suggests that students are bad judges of how many textbooks their professor required. They report inaccurately, right? If they're inaccurate about something like that. And then the last thing is, are teachers really objective if they help write the textbook? Or even if they just chose it, right? They have a vested interest in this. So to what extent are those objective measures? Not to say that research shouldn't be done. I think it's really important. But certainly triangulated, right? And what we did find is a really limited number of studies focusing on student outcomes related to open textbook. The Oer Hub has that as one of their hypotheses, and they have listed 2 studies total, and both of them deal with MOOCs. Neither of them deal with textbook replacement on the Oer Hub. We've got Petrides, if I misread, Petrides, thank you so much. I'm going to get better at this the more that I hang out with everyone in this room. And John, they did a study that didn't form broad conclusions about the quality, but it did suggest that a comparison was an important way of looking at quality. Then you've got Hilton and Lehman, who compared the performance of students using psychology textbooks, and they noticed differences, although they didn't start to do the sorts of statistical analyses that would lead to maybe some causal inference, but they did develop a basic frame that this was a way that we could look at open textbooks. It's the first study that I know of that did that I was able to find. And then that same for Hilton and others that came out this year in a Rodel that looked at that same thing at Scottsdale Community College. So then that leads to the question for you, what can we learn about textbook outcomes from the general literature that maybe we could bring into the OER community to structure some of our studies and to gain utility there? And I found 3 kinds of studies that dealt with outcomes. One kind was non-experimental case studies. There were quasi-experimental studies and experimental studies as well. So for the quasi-experimental studies, these are the least suited to causal inferences about outcomes, but there were some interesting things, and I have these on a slide we'll make available by SlideShare. It's not there right now. But these are looks at textbook usage rates or students' use of pedagogical aids and correlation of online textbook features and outcomes, and where they basically asked students how often they use certain features and then tried to correlate those with outcomes. So that was one kind of research. They all shared the assumption that looking at student outcomes was important for evaluating how good a textbook was functioning, how well it was functioning. Excuse me, I'm an English teacher, wow. So then, that's important, that's an assumption of some of this outcome research as well. They also highlight that there are problems with the textbook research. For example, students don't actually use textbooks as often as teachers perceive that they use textbooks. So that's going to limit how much of a difference textbooks are actually going to make. It also gives us some cautions in teacher perceptions of textbooks and student perceptions as well. Also, we're not really seeing valid causal inferences, as all of these studies acknowledge. The quasi-experimental designs, there's also more studies like this that are quasi-experimental designs. So you've got like the effective study guide completion. You've got one group that was one class that used the study guides and one class that didn't. Or you've got Christian published science textbooks. This one was actually the closest to an analog of the research question. Are the Christian versions of these science textbooks leading to the same outcomes that regular versions were? You've got the effective reading and math curriculum on standardized test scores. You've got different pre-service geometry curriculum that are being used, so comparing outcomes based on that, or like the long-term effects of economics textbooks. And these were all really interesting. They're better at supporting causal inference. Many of them still have problems with competing explanations or confounding variables, or a flawed research design. So just having a quasi-experimental design, I found looking at those was not really enough to support a really strong causal inference. And some of these articles were better than others, but some had real big problems, like having the treatment group in both your treatment data and your control data. For one of the cases, I won't call anyone out in particular, but like that, they were in both groups, and then comparator or things like that. In other words, you still have to be careful, but there were some lessons that, for me, were really helpful in how can I structure research that I think maybe improves upon this and takes it to a next level. The third kinds of study that there were experimental designs, but most of the experimental designs that we found focused on not the adoption of a whole textbook or a whole curriculum, but rather on specific features that can be conducted in a short session where people were randomly assigned to learning the same information with a textbook feature and without it, and then recalling it a short time later. So for me, that's really interesting. I think there is some kind of relevance to this, right? Because OER can be used in ways that other materials cannot, and you could do some experimental designs with this. But certainly that's harder to do in educational research, and for people who are adopting whole textbooks and wanting to know if that's making a difference, there might not be as much utility in that kind of approach as there are in some others. Now, one of the things that I hope in presenting this is that we look at some of these and think about this, that this is sparking ideas, because this is some of the research that's coming out of our Open Ed group right now, but we would love to have partners in this research who are also asking some of these questions in some of the same ways. Not because it's the only way to look at quality or the only way to look at utility, it's certainly not. Like, there are other great ways to think about this question, but starting to triangulate this is really important, and having other people asking these same questions and creating a robust literature, I think, is an important step in converting the unconverted, right? If I'm just going to talk to people who are at this conference, we're already pretty much on board, or many of us are, that, hey, this is a good thing for just theoretical reasons or cost reasons. But if we want to reach out and broaden this community, this is the kind of data that will speak to some people. I think that that's a compelling reason to be doing this kind of thing. So here are some of the things that I learned from this literature review, some of the implications of this. I see a real need for empirical studies of OER use in classrooms and the effectiveness of OER as textbook replacement. In other words, when we look at the quality of OER, look at it as a function of student outcomes. It's been done in the textbook literature. It's been done sometimes pretty well in the textbook literature. It can be done in OER as well if we're inventive and if we think about ways to have a methodology and evaluate our own practice. I think that can be done. I think it's important to use methods that can support causal inference, because this is a causal way of thinking. It's a causal chain of thinking that adopting will lead to some effect on learning. So that if you're going to pursue that kind of logic, you can try to eliminate some of the threats to your validity, some competing explanations. You can use statistical procedures that are better than others. You can do things like that. That's really important as well. And then this continued consideration of cost, outcomes, use of perceptions, that we use this to supplement a wide range of different studies and research, that we present something that is something that's broad-minded, because certainly there are probably people in this room who really bristle at the idea of thinking about quality as a function of student scores. That kind of research design is jarring or abrasive, and I understand why. I actually do. I'm very empathetic to that point of view. Even though a lot of the research that I'm doing involves that line of thinking right now, I think about things in other ways as well, and I can see some of the problems with that. So if we use this as not the main piece of a research agenda, but complementing other things as well. I want to take just a quick moment and just mention that for those of you who weren't with us the last two sessions, two of the studies that we're doing as at Brigham Young University with the Open Ed group deal with this outcomes research. And one is at the community and state college level, so 2- and 4-year colleges, where we're looking at grades and retention data and pass-fail and withdrawal rates related to OER adoption. And the other at the high school and actually just the secondary level with science textbooks, where we've seen actually a slight improvement in student scores on the state tests after the switch to OER. So if you're interested in that, we have slides from earlier presentations, or we can talk about those afterwards. Now, there is a little bit of time that I'd like to, those are my references. So I put them on really small, but the reason that I put these on there is so that anyone who's interested can look at the slideshow afterwards and see all the studies references, right? You don't really care to look at these right now, I presume. So instead of putting them on 6 different slides.
I'm not certain about that ninth one, I think that's way off.
So I'm interested in a couple of things, if you don't mind. If there are other studies that you know of that you think could be included, I'd be interested in you throwing those out there. Otherwise, we can have questions that you want to ask, and we can go and be done early, since I know this is the last session of the day. So start with studies that you know of that you'd like to see included in something like this, or that could add to this, and then we'll go to questions. Okay. Yeah, back here and then up here.
I just wanted to know where I can find that references.
So we'll put this on SlideShare, and we'll link to it from the conference web page. Also, anyone who wants to email me directly, are our emails attached to our? Oh
No, they're not.
They are, but I don't know if they're accessible.
You can act.
So go to the description for this session in the online program, and we'll put the link
We'll
to
put
the
the link
slides there.
to the slides there. We'll do that what day?
Tonight.
Tonight. We'll do that tonight, so that will be there. Also, on t.jared.robinson@gmail.com, and that's, you can, also openedgroup.org is a way that you can contact any of us and address questions about any of the past 3 presentations. Thanks, that's a great question. Up here.
I don't know if it was listed up there, but SRI just issued a really interesting validation study of 6 digital Algebra 1 projects. And I think the design was good. of
Good.
that study, so you might want to really look at that.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, I'm going to actually write this down because. Jared. Yes. You got it? Awesome. So the SRI study. Thank you.
Maybe one of your
That's awesome.
We're a team.
That's good. Thanks, TJ. Other.
File your own communicator.
What's that? Yes. Thank you. Okay. Other questions then?
Maybe you should add into the what works clearinghouse. I think they have a lot of studies of this kind. Maybe don't have too much about OER. But
They don't. They don't. But you know, one of the things that we've discussed with a little bit of glee is the thought of OER, what works clearinghouse. You know, studies in there. There's a certain amount of cognitive dissonance there, but it's not entirely unpleasing. So. Yeah, I mean, certainly this kind of research, if it's done well, could be the kind of thing that, for people who really care about the What Works Clearinghouse, that would be compelling for them, right? Yeah, very good. Here, yes.
So you mentioned the Oer Research Hub, and I was just wondering if because their project is underway for some time. I was wondering if there are other plans to sort of dovetail your literature review with their research, because it seems so complementary.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah, I mean, certainly they're welcome to anything I have, and I talked to Rob a little bit about this after his presentation. We also have 2 studies that I'm sure they'll be really interested in as soon as we get kind of in a place where it's semi-complete. So
I mean, in some ways, we're kind of a primary producer of research, and they're more of an aggregator
Yeah.
and synthesizer.
Yeah, that's great.
But this essentially does some of the same work that they're trying to do in terms of, but since a lot of the studies in this review draw from the general textbook research to suggest directions for OER research, you know, it's not necessarily OER research that I looked at a lot, just because we don't have a lot in this direction, even though I think it could be really valuable to us if we were to put forth the effort to do that. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm really intrigued as to, firstly, how little serious empirical research that there is in open education, and secondly, into the use of educational resources in open in education generally, like textbooks and stuff. I mean, why do you think it is? It seems like a fairly fundamental thing to want to look at.
Well, I'll go ahead and throw out an idea, and then if people have other ideas. Your question, I think, is why is there this lack of research, empirical research in OER? Because there's not a lack of writing. There are a lot of people who are writing about OER, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think that a lot of the writing about OER is OER converts writing to the OER converted. That we have and that's really a fun way to do it. I mean, there's a place for this, right? And as the community grows, you know, that's a powerful thing, and it's a way to grow. What I don't think that there is as much of is writing about OER research to the non-OER convert. And when I was brought, you know, David brought me onto this team as a non-OER convert, and I'm still, I think, by and large, more skeptical than most. I'm interested in either way, you know, I'm interested in all this, but I think that a lot of that focus of how are we going to write about this in a way that will be appealing to the non-OER community is something that's really important. It's an important next step, right? It's an important next step to make this credible to people who aren't just buying in for theoretical reasons.
You get outside the echo chamber, right?
Right. Good. Let's bounce to this side of the room, and I'll bounce to the back a little
Do you
bit.
have some bibliography on OER research in the area of language learning?
So none of my work dealt with that. None of the, you know, the net that I cast out pulled in things on language learning. So no, I personally don't know.
So but does it exist, you think? Or?
Maybe I'll crowdsource this one. How about OER in language learning? Anyone aware of? We had a presentation on it at the conference. I wasn't in that session, but I did see it on the program.
But it was in research. It was,
Right.
Yeah, but actually, I think that's from the Texas initiative, right? I mean, I think they're the only ones even doing OER language, at least the only ones that have ever presented it.
If I may say something, the Open University in the UK, the Department of Languages has the lower repository. So we haven't published an awful lot, but the repository is there and we're doing research on it. So I am interested in it for anything working on it.
So language research, I mean, that's another right. I mean, we could have a whole session on what are holes in OER research that we could fill, right? This is my way of saying, this is a hole that I'm working on. I invite you to come and work on it with me if that is something that's interesting to you. We have another minute. Yes.
Well, I have 3 questions. Pick what you want. So one, I wonder if there's any way to tap into this saving idea, and you know, typically students save money, so maybe students can use that money for their learning to enhance their learning in another way. Is there a way to research that? Is one question, and alternatively, you know, sometimes professors take existing OER for their class. That saves their time to prepare for the class. They can use that time for something else that enhances learning. So that's one approach to this question that I think I can think. The other thing, so that's question number 1. Question number 2 is that you know, the textbook quality probably matters, and probably the compatibility with the instructor matters. So, you know, whether it's open or not, some textbooks are better than others, and if you map the quality in some way, you know, some of the OER textbooks score really low, as well as bad as some of the proprietary ones. So unless you have some control over that, you know, I think there is some fundamental difficulty in this kind of research, is what I see. And okay, I forgot the third one.
So I love those questions. I think we're out of time, so we might leave those as ponderous questions to think about as we go, because people want to go and get off. But maybe we could chat about that. I do have thoughts about that. But thank you very much. I appreciate you listening.
Dinner at 6:30, back in the ballroom.